This is the first modded video game. Originally released to show off the PDP-1 digital computer, Spacewar was developed in 1961 by 3 students at the Hingham Institute in Massachusetts. This also makes it one of the first video games. By today's standards, it's pretty basic, a precursor to games like Asteroids and Missile Command. The gameplay in Spacewar involves 2 players taking control of glowing dots on a screen, shooting at each other with other glowing dots to land a hit and win. It was first presented to the public at MIT's annual Science Open House in May of 1962. By this point, original developers J. Martin Grates, Wayne Wheatonen, and Stephen R. Slug Russell had added a range of features and even designed some prototype controllers to avoid equipment damage. While the original devs of Spacewar drifted away from the project after its unveiling, others, not just at MIT but across the country, took on the task of making their own changes. These affected everything from the visual fidelity to the design of the game to the difficulty. Some changes even added new features like single-shot torpedoes, while others made the game more accessible. Across the country, people were modding Spacewar. I don't really mod video games. As someone who grew up predominantly playing console games, the concept of modding was foreign to me. The closest I got to it was owning a Game Shark from a Game Boy Color when I was a kid. I didn't even own a computer capable of playing modern games until like 2016, when I built one from scratch for playing a certain Blizzard game that came out that year. Even after building my PC and making improvements on it and going from a humble gaming machine to something you see on r/battle stations, I still am predominantly a console player. And as a result, modding is a pretty big blind spot for me. As someone who's grown up immersed in gaming, I had mixed feelings about modding. On one hand, I played games mostly to experience the adventures created by the developers, something that modding often felt in opposition to. On the other hand, I've dabbled with a couple mods before. I've added aesthetic packs to Stardew Valley, I've added custom items into The Sims, but for the most part, I don't think I've ever done a full modded playthrough. So I decided to change this. I wanted to know what the big deal was. I wanted to know what modders and my computer were capable of. I wanted an answer to the question, why the hell should I mod a game? So I picked out a game to mod. A game that felt perfect for it. A game that's so ubiquitous to modding that people look at you funny if you play it without mods. The perfect vanilla base game. I was gonna f up Skyrim. My journey started with a relatively simple goal: download as many mods as possible, with the end product being something unrecognizable from its vanilla states. Skyrim was a game that I knew well. It was a game that we all knew well. Originally released on the memorable November 11, 2011, Skyrim has about 18 different versions for 11 different platforms, 20 if you include Legendary Editions. The availability of Skyrim has made it the butt of several jokes, including a full Keegan-Michael Key skit created by Bethesda for an Alexa version of the game.
A mud crab scuttles towards you.
That's real, by the way. You can download and play Skyrim Very Special Edition on any Alexa-enabled device. Do I recommend it for first-timers? Not necessarily, but you do you. I own 4 of these releases, one being the original Xbox 360 release, 2 more on other consoles, and the most recent PC version of the game. I've sunk a lot of time into the game, but primarily on release, with only a smattering of hours on other versions. And all of my time has been spent on the vanilla version. We were gonna change that. For obvious reasons, I picked my PC copy to play. While I could still mod Skyrim on console, I would be limiting myself significantly when it came to mod type and availability. So I got to work. I downloaded a mod manager, set my game up for easy implementation, and set aside a list of mods that I wanted to add. Before adding anything, I played through the beginning of the game just one more time, just to remember what it was like. Beginning a playthrough prior to installing mods isn't best practice, but we'll get to that later. Once I felt ready, the modding began. When it comes to immediate appeal, there's nothing quite like updating the graphics. Back in the infancy of video game modding and video games in general, the rapid evolution of graphical fidelity was a pretty noteworthy thing. I've already mentioned how Spacewar was developed as a way to show off the new and revolutionary PDP-1, but it only took about 6 years for 10 updated versions of the PDP computer to come and go. Fueled by the Cold War, computers were evolving extremely quickly, which also meant that Spacewar's design became pretty quickly outdated. While the game skipped the next 5 iterations of PDP computers, it made its return on the PDP-6. This version would see the addition of a scoreboard and a Spacewar mode, which allowed research tasks to be performed in the background while the game was running. A more powerful computer meant that the game could also run smoother, look better, and display more information. Since the code was publicly available, anyone could mod it in whatever way they wanted to. No one owned Spacewar, and its biggest fans were early programmers. This moddable version of the game became such a big deal that according to Greats in 1981, you could find it on just about any computer with a programmable CRT. So the first modded video game went from a marketing tactic to a widespread phenomenon in itself. It became an inseparable companion to every early computer developer, so much so that it was part of any new cohort's induction. This was the case with one Ampex engineer named Nolan Bushnell, who was shown Spacewar by one of the original creators, Slug Russell. Bushnell loved the idea so much that he started thinking of ways to put a coin slot into it, combining early modded video games with carnival midways. This idea would transform Spacewar into a game called Computer Space, a gorgeous fiberglass-encased CRT display capable of playing an updated version of Spacewar. This game, created by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, also marked the beginning of Atari. Skyrim is an old game. Maybe not as old as Computer Space, but even the most recent versions of it look a little out of date. This is the first thing that I wanted to change. Like Spacewar, the subsequent iterations of Skyrim allowed for a lot more potential. The addition of Bethesda's creation kit allowed for much more straightforward adjustments, letting people add in their own assets and create new frameworks for expanding the modding experience. So people started updating the graphics. I mean, if you were going to keep a game relevant, making it look like a game that could come out today was a pretty good start. This was my goal too. I dug in hard on graphics mods. Anything that I thought could make Skyrim look like a modern game made its way into my mod manager. More beautiful night skies, better looking water, more realistic lighting, even footprints made their way into my copy of the game. It was at this point that I also added a few audio mods too. I wanted to see what a player remastered version of Skyrim could look like. Unfortunately, this is also where my lack of modding experience first started to rear its ugly head. My game wouldn't launch. With the sheer number of compatibility options available in each mod and my novice understanding of what any of it meant, I had somewhere clicked the wrong thing or installed the wrong mod or something. So instead of enjoying my mods, I spent that first day trying to figure out which one was the culprit. Fortunately, there were only about 10 mods installed at this point, so it just took some extra review of the instructions to figure it out. I think it was the Creation Club constant that was getting my way, but I actually found a couple other things that were wrong too. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I worked it out. I booted up my game, hit the continue button, and to my shock and awe, Skyrim looked the same. I don't know what I was expecting exactly. I think maybe I thought a couple mods could turn the game from a polygonal mess into a photorealistic blockbuster. It was a little disappointing, but it also just felt like a sign that I wasn't doing quite enough to revolutionize the graphics of the game. Still, there were some things that I couldn't notice at first glance, mods that increased immersion instead of just updating textures. I think the first thing I noticed was the sound. Since Skyrim was a game that I was relatively familiar with, new sound effects surprised me. Then, the lighting. After the in-game day ended, the sun set and I was met with a level of darkness that I wasn't used to in Skyrim. I looked up at the stars and, well, suddenly I knew this was gonna be fun. The year is 1978. Doug McRae, Kevin Curran, and a small group of MIT students decided to set up an arcade in their dorm room. They only had a single pinball table at the start, a gift from McRae's brother. When the table started pulling in quarters, they started to expand their business. Going from that one single machine to about 20 different games over the next couple of years, McRae and company had turned a small-time hustle into a legitimate on-campus business. But one game in particular was a significant moneymaker for them: Missile Command. Missile Command was a 1980s shoot-'em-up where you shot at incoming missiles to protect a number of cities at the bottom of the screen. Explicitly a Cold War simulation, Missile Command was a massive hit, and its unique trackball design is pretty instantly recognizable in even modern-day arcades. It's also considered one of the games of developer Atari's golden age, the company having grown significantly since Nolan Bushnell first modded Spacewar to a playable arcade cabinet. It was also hard. The reason Missile Command made so much money for McRae and his cohort was because people kept tossing quarters at it every single time that they died. At one point, McRae's 3 Missile Command cabinets were raking in $650 a week, and then that number started to go down. Over half a grand in income dropped to a meager $150. It's not that the students weren't playing Missile Command. In fact, they were playing it more than before. The problem was that the students had gotten good. Fewer game over screens meant fewer quarters fed to the machine, meaning less income for the students. It turns out that skill was bad for business, and McRae couldn't exactly afford to sell his machines and buy new ones every single time the students figured out a game. So instead, McRae and Curran did what MIT students do. They started tinkering. What they came up with was a little circuit board that they attached directly to the main board of Missile Command. This modification board, a physical mod, updated the colors, added a new attack mode, and increased the difficulty. There was even a UFO enemy in case, the Cold War wasn't cool enough. The mod kept the game easy at the start, but unlike classic Missile Command, this new super missile attack would ramp up the difficulty as the player progressed. It even contained a number of switches that allowed for different difficulty levels in case things got too easy again. It was a hit, a massive hit. The mods only cost $30, were sold for $295, and could easily be attached to any existing Missile Command cabinets. McRae and Curran started a company called General Computer Corporation, or GCC for short, and started selling their modification boards nationwide, netting $250,000 in just 60 days. Missile Command was a good game, but GCC took the time to learn how they could improve it, resulting in one of the earliest physical mods. Overhauling a game isn't an easy thing to do. Nowadays, we can download patches and updates via the internet, but before your console was connected, when a game shipped, that was pretty much it. As a result, a lot of good games wound up with some pretty famous issues and bugs. Some wound up immortalized for their game-changing nature, like Missing No in Pokemon Red and Blue, but others were just kind of a pain to deal with. In particular, many of the games from the late aughts and early 2010s were buggy messes. This was an era where games were rapidly evolving and some level of internet connectivity was being implemented, but games lacked the quick turnaround of updates and changes that we have now. Some developers were known for these bugs more than others. I think you can see where I'm going with this. My favorite post about the number of bugs in Skyrim comes from www.gamesas.com, a forum dedicated to Bethesda games. Is it weird to have a favorite page about bugs? On this forum, there's a post called the Unofficial Bug List, which documented every single recorded bug, glitch, and issue with the game's first release. There are over 600 individually identified problems, explained over the course of 21,000 words. To put that in context, if I made a video where all I did was read out loud this one post, it would be over 2 hours long. Skyrim is buggy as hell. But it doesn't have to be. Modding can make things a bit more comfortable. On nexusmods.com, one of the most popular modding websites on the internet, you'll find the unofficial Skyrim Special Edition patch, a mod that aims to fix as many bugs within the game as possible. It's been downloaded 25 million times and is the second most downloaded mod on Nexus Mods, falling just behind another patch mod, though that one's designed for mod compatibility. It's hard to say just how many glitches the unofficial Skyrim patch fixes. but estimates range from hundreds to tens of thousands. It's being constantly updated as well, as every glitch fix generally results in the appearance of a couple more. And this is just one mod. My goal in adding these kinds of quality of life mods was to scratch an itch that I'd had since starting the game. It felt old, like a game that I'd already put hundreds of hours into. Because, well, I had. I remembered every minor nuisance, every bug that got in my way, every complaint that I'd had about how the game worked came rushing back. So, I fixed them. When an issue or annoyance sprung up, I looked up a mod for it and added it to my game. Suddenly, the game played smoother and my overall enjoyment went up. Having that kind of instant fix felt rewarding, and it made me feel like I knew the game just a little bit better. But it was also kind of overwhelming. It made me question which inconveniences made the game more nuanced and which should be removed. I've played with cheats before in games, and I have a tendency to go a little bit overboard. I didn't want to do that this time, so I focused on mods that integrated systems that made gameplay more interesting, rather than mods that would just straight up make Skyrim easier. But even then, there were so many options. And at the time, I didn't know any of them, so my guesses for what was best to add were mostly just based on what was popular. If you were to look up overhauls and patches for Skyrim on Nexus Mods, you'd find over 10,000 mods there alone. These range from patches for the various versions of the game to system overhauls and updates for various mods. Like graphics mods, these kind of mods take a game as old as Skyrim and work to bring it up to the standards of modern day gaming. They also demonstrate the sheer dedication of people who play and update the game. Why wait for Bethesda to release a 21st version of Skyrim that fixes some bugs and adds new ones when you can just fix the game yourself and share that fix with everyone else? Well, there's the potential legal trouble, of course. Back in 1981, McRae, Karan, and the rest of their crew at GCC are being sued by Atari for $15 million over their modifications to Missile Command. But McRae wasn't worried. When designing Super Missile Attack, GCC had been careful to not use any of Atari's original code. Since they hadn't copied code, McRae was confident that they hadn't violated copyright, and that Atari didn't have a leg to stand on. So GCC went on the counterattack. They made a new version of Super Missile Attack and told people who wanted to buy the original to call Atari and complain. They even countersued. All the bad press and lack of an angle resulted in Atari and GCC sitting down for talks. In the end, Atari settled, not only dropping their suit against GCC, but hiring them for a 2-year contract. Atari's request? Just no more mods without permission. This legal case between Atari and GCC is important for a less obvious reason. Atari settled because they knew they wouldn't win, and losing a court case like this would set a precedent that anyone can mod their games. Despite how prevalent modding is in today's PC gaming culture, mods have always occupied a gray space in terms of copyright legality. Even Nintendo is still aggressively opposed to modding. The EULA, or End User License Agreements, for both the Switch and the Switch 2 specifically state that users may not modify their games or consoles. While some companies, like Bethesda, actively embrace and integrate modding into their games, the lawsuits between Atari and GCC would only be the beginning of a decades-long battle for validity. But when I boot up Skyrim and download an unofficial patch that fixes persistent, game-breaking bugs and mods that add quality-of-life updates and streamline my gaming experience, I have to wonder, how could something so good be so divisive? Super Missile Attack wasn't the only modification board that GCC was responsible for. During their court case with Atari, GCC had been working on another board for another insanely popular game, Pac-Man. Originally, this mod was called Crazy Auto, and it gave Pac-Man legs, both literally and metaphorically. The game significantly updated the gameplay, adding 4 new mazes and changing the patterns of the ghost to be less easily memorized. But with the restrictions in place due to their contract with Atari, GCC knew they couldn't continue the game without permission from Pac-Man's publisher, Midway. So they bluffed. Since their court case with Atari was settled outside of court, no one knew exactly what happened. GCC told Midway that they were modding Pac-Man, and Midway could either give them permission or they'd beat them like they beat Atari. But Midway was thrilled. Pac-Man sales had slowed down and they were desperate for another hit game.
So Crazy Auto went from an unlicensed mod to a direct sequel. All the precautions taken to avoid copyright infringement were reverted, but with one major change. This game wouldn't star Pac-Man. It would introduce the new femme fatale of the game world, Miss Pac-Man. It's undeniable that one of the major draws to modding is the ability to customize a game to your liking. Gaming often is a personal experience. While many games feature multiplayer options, the character you play as and the way you interact with the world belongs to you alone. Midway's insistence upon introducing Miss Pac-Man as a protagonist was partially a response to Pac-Man's popularity among women. So the sequel introducing a female protagonist seemed the logical next step. It allowed for a new generation of female gamers to relate to a character they saw on screen, even if she was just a yellow ball with a bow and lipstick.
With the introduction of PC gaming in the 1980s, the doors were swung wide open for a more personal, customized experience. Simple hex editors became available, allowing gamers to do things as simple as renaming characters to match their own to maxing all their stats for a bit of an easier time. One of the earliest PC mods was a reskin of Muse Software's Castle Wolfenstein, named Castle Smurfenstein, which does what it sounds like. Apparently, in the 1980s, Nazis weren't as scary as Smurfs. It's actually the second game in a planned mod trilogy, with the first being a Smurf-themed reskin of Dino Eggs called Dino Smurf. Yeah.
But regardless, these Smurf-themed mods made important points. Not only was modding PC games possible, but it was a lot easier than having to create a physical board from scratch. Suddenly, anyone can mod, even kids who hated Smurfs. Computer access and literacy was on the rise, enabling a new generation of kids and young adults to learn new skills and test them out. Like Super Missile Attack, a lot of these early mods were attempts at updating a game experience to make it more challenging or in line with the rapidly evolving tech of the time. PC modding was here to stay, and it was about to shake things up. I think it goes without saying that I don't really know how to make my own mods. I've dabbled in some programming, I've learned what rudimentary game design looks like, but I'm a writer at heart. Creating the foundation of a game isn't where my skills lie. Fortunately, modding is easier than ever, and even for someone like me who has no modding literacy whatsoever, you can add pretty much whatever you want without too much trouble. It's as easy as changing your clothes.
Nowadays, we have sources like Nexus Mods, Steam Workshop, and ModZB for finding ways to customize our experience. But even these still require a bit of literacy to get them working. As I mentioned at the start of this essay, there's general best practices when it comes to modding. Stuff that might not be as obvious to someone like me who has no clue what they're doing.
For starters, it's recommended that you get everything figured out before you ever start playing the game. This means deciding which mods you want to install, making sure that your mods are compatible, and installing everything before you ever hit start a new game. This isn't always necessary, but as your mod list grows, the risk of negative interactions breaking a save or just causing unexpected behavior goes up. If your mods are gonna break a game, it's better that this happens at the beginning rather than the end.
This was something I knew going into the experiment, but it's something I ignored because, well, I needed to. Detailing the experience of progressive modding a game isn't as easy when everything's there from the start. Fortunately, I didn't break my save file, though I was fully expected to at some points. There was the occasional dramatic bug, but they mostly just served to keep things interesting and didn't really affect my progress in the game. Occasionally, a mod would have a weird interaction with another mod, but these things were relatively easy to fix since the culprits were limited to the newest additions to my list.
I want to stress that part of this is the tireless efforts of mod creators to ensure future compatibility with other mods. Even modding software comes with compatibility features built in to avoid your game failing altogether. Years and years of modding and gradual software improvements have resulted in an experience that's pretty straightforward. Other best practices for modding include keeping your mods well organized and up to date. It's also important to report bugs as you come across them. After all, mod creators are generally just people who are passionate about a game, and generally aren't making a living off of their mods. Volunteering your feedback and support can go a long way in making their lives easier.
It was around this point that I really started to get back into the game. Updating the gameplay and the graphics to a more modern interpretation helped, but adding new features and elements based on my needs kept me invested in what I was playing. I went from clocking maybe an hour or two per day in the game to losing full days to it, thinking, I wonder if there's a mod for this, and exploring the content that I just added. This is also exactly why Bethesda is so supportive of modding. In games like Skyrim and Fallout 4, modding can add hundreds of hours of new content, keeping you invested in their games without them needing to, well, pay for extra developments. It's a very stark change to what modding once was, a dubiously legal system of hacking and distributing potentially copyright-infringing material. But for every Bethesda that's in support of modding, there's a company that would sooner take you to court than have you adjust their game files.
There's quite a few of these court cases, and modders don't always win. But when they do, it's a pretty big deal. Take the 1993 court case between Nintendo and Lou's Galoob Toys. You might be more familiar with its gaming accessory, the Game Genie. If that one's a bit too old for you, similar accessories include the Action Replay and the Game Shark. Specifically, the Game Genie was a type of device that plugged into a console and allowed you to hack it, customizing the experience to your liking. Already aware that Nintendo wouldn't be happy with the Game Genie, Galoob initiated a lawsuit against them in 1990 to validate their lack of copyright infringements. Nintendo countersued, relying on another case from 1983 between Midway and Arctic International that focused on hardware that created derivative versions of Pac-Man and Galaxian. Where GCC pulled ahead, Arctic did not. A decade later, Nintendo attempted to use that case against the Game Genie, but it didn't end up working out in their favor. The court ruled in favor of Galoob, stating that the Game Genie couldn't be copyright infringing since all it did was allow people to jump around a little bit in their games. Changes relied on having the device, so the games weren't altered permanently, nor were they sold. The save files were just slightly modded.
Predictably, this court case had a pretty big impact on modding. I mean, if Nintendo couldn't win a lawsuit over a couple mods, then who would? But even beyond modding, Galoob versus Nintendo had implications for all sorts of game-related content production. It's the reason why live streams, gaming tournaments, and Let's Plays exist. Hell, it's partly the reason why I can record and show footage of my own gameplay sessions. Gaming was more personalized than ever, and as a result, the player themselves became a decision-maker in the larger culture. And as the 90s began, this personal power creep continued to scale. But one game, released early in the 1990s, would really push things into overdrive.
The year is 1993. A small, scrappy team of developers had just finished a 30-hour session of final tests and checks before releasing their game. The internet was already abuzz. They'd been waiting for this game for a long time. It had gotten one delay, but several months later, on December 9th, it was ready to go. On the stroke of midnight, December 10th, a computer game called Doom was uploaded to the internet. But this was only the beginning.
This wasn't the first rodeo for id Software, the development team behind Doom. They had previously dropped a game called Wolfenstein 3D, a spiritual successor to Castle Wolfenstein. Not only did Wolfenstein 3D more or less begin the era of the first-person shooter, but it was also a pretty heavily modded game. Hackers had had their way with Wolfenstein, breaking into the game's code to adjust it to their liking. id Software wanted to make it easier for them this time. John Carmack, the programmer for the game, created a subsystem called WAD, an acronym for Where's All the Data? And as its name suggests, it contains all the data. Well, specifically, it separated the media data. This way, if someone wanted to mod the game, they could do so without damaging the original code. Carmack also uploaded the source code for level editing and utilities in case these fledgling modders wanted to get inventive and make some new stuff for the game.
This was a big deal. It's like if someone gave you the keys to a museum and said, hey, put whatever you want in here. Not everyone at id was thrilled with the decision. There were questions about potential legal concerns, copyright issues, income, but Carmack didn't care. Neither did John Romero, the team's lead designer. Their concerns more so lie with making sure players could get the most out of Doom, and it only took them about a month and a half for those players to simplify the process further. At the end of January 1994, the Doom Editor Utility, or DEU, made its way to the World Wide Web. Suddenly, it wasn't just the components that were available, but the instructions too. With the DEU, you didn't need hacker know-how and coding skills to mod Doom. You just opened up the program and got to work. The creativity and dedication that went into modding the game at this stage kind of opened the floodgates to modding. It had helped that companies were kind of afraid of potentially losing in court to modders, and Cormac and Romero's open willingness to cooperate with the modding community lent it even further credibility. Unlike prior modding milestones, which tended to happen discreetly between hackers and companies looking to up their game, Doom's modding was not only officially endorsed, but it was made for the players as a way of giving back to the community and helping a game engine flourish with new ideas and creativity.
These days, Doom is still going strong, not only its original versions, which now include officially endorsed fan-made levels, but the reboot series as well, which is also sort of a sequel. It's confusing. But what's less confusing is the game's publisher, one Bethesda Softworks, most well known for another game that we've been talking about.
Bethesda has been historically pretty good about modding. As early as Morrowind, they've been giving players the tools to add fan-made contents. For Skyrim, it was only 3 months before they released the Creation Kit, their official modification tool. With it, modders immediately got to work, adding whatever they could come up with. But the relationship hasn't always been ideal. Years after Skyrim was released, Bethesda introduced the Creation Club, which helped to vaguely canonize certain mods, including fishing. But what I didn't mention is how the system was more or less put into place to generate income. Mods are generally free. You can donate to the creators, and should if there's a mod you love. But you don't have to. You can just boot up Nexus and mod to your heart's content.
Bethesda and Steam had both tried to monetize this. Back in 2015, Valve announced a paid mods feature focusing on Skyrim. It didn't take long for there to be some pretty significant backlash. In a blog post after removal, they wrote, "It's clear we didn't understand what we were doing." But with the introduction of the Creation Club in 2017, it seemed pretty clear what Valve was after those 2 years prior. None of these Creation Club mods are free, and over a decade later, Bethesda never folded like Valve did. You want fishing? You gotta pay up.
I do think that it should be stated that some of these Creation Club mods are honestly quite good. The Anniversary Edition of Skyrim includes all 74 of them, and they blend to the game remarkably well. During my own time playing Skyrim, when I came across the Forgotten Seasons quest, I didn't even know it was a mod until I needed to look something up. I had just thought it was a particularly good quest. But that's not exclusive to Creation Club content. Plenty of the mods you'll find on Nexus add large-scale adventures that are tirelessly worked into the lore of the game and made to blend in so perfectly that you don't even realize that you're playing a mod made by fans. If you've beaten a game and want something more, mods can help you with that.
Skyrim has a lot of mods. I think that's pretty clear based on everything I've said so far. But what particularly interests me, something that drew me to this project in the first place, are the mods that straight up build new levels and stories into the game. There's a couple I was aware of before doing any research, including Legacy of the Dragonborn and the Forgotten City. But when I actually sat down and looked into the variety of content additions, it was shocking. On Nexus Mods, as of writing this sentence, there are 3,498 mods in the Quests and Adventures category for Skyrim Special Edition. This does not include the New Locations category, which adds another 1,050 mods, and includes several DLC-sized new areas with new quests, dungeons, and characters. Now, it probably goes without saying that I haven't played through most of these new experiences. Honestly, I got so sidetracked by Legacy of the Dragonborn's museum that I kind of stopped adding new mods for a while. If I were to actually play through all these new stories, quests, and areas, I probably wouldn't have time to write about any other games. Besides, there's plenty of YouTubers who have talked about these mods and likely have a better perspective on them than I ever will.
In addition to Skyrim's Anniversary Edition, there's a few other official versions of Doom that have fan-made mods built in. Granted, you don't have to play with them installed, but they're more or less developer approved. Beyond that, both id Software and Bethesda designed their games with modding in mind. So what does that mean for the canonicity of mods? Do mods that get added to future releases of the game count as canon? Do they, at the very least, count as more of that game? This is a question I can't answer. Even diving into the implications of it would merit a full-length video of its own. But at the very least, I want to use those implications to highlight the fact that the people who make these mods are talented. Many people entering the game design industry are finding their start in modding. They take a game that they love and they work to find improvements for it. This can start with just adding mods. I'll be honest, if this experience has taught me anything, it's mostly that I suck at modding. It feels like a weird thing to suggest, that you can be good at adding mods, but you see people with these beautiful looking games and then you look at your own and you're left wondering what it is you're missing. Many of the major content mods that I added, I never ended up experiencing, partially because the game is just so large that I would add a mod and just forget about it. But how is that different from all the other quests that I skipped that were already in the game?
I struggled in modding Skyrim because I didn't know what to look for or how to balance my experience to optimize the game. It's a skill that I would have to develop, a skill that's closely aligned with standard game design. And that's the same as it's always been. From Spacewar to Super Missile Attack, developers have been getting their start in hacking and modifying games that they love, only to bring their own skill sets into the industry to make something new. Because modders aren't just altering old games, they're making new ones, too.
Modding in the 1990s was somewhat of a revolution. id Software releasing the tools to modify both Doom and their follow-up game Quake gave gamers the chance to develop their own skill set and dive into the world of game creation. But there was another game in the 1990s that would have an impact on modding. A game that would arguably have the biggest impact on what we're playing today.
Half-Life, developed by Valve and published by Sierra Studios at the end of 1998, marked the start of a gaming empire. The game stars protagonist Gordon Freeman, a grizzled physicist armed with a crowbar and a series of increasingly powerful guns, caught in the middle of a plot with universal implications. The game had it all. It had a good story, it was fun as hell, the enemies were clever, and there were secrets to find if you spent enough time looking. And it wasn't pretentious. Like Doom, it was first and foremost just a good time. But if there was one thing that was special about Half-Life, it was that it was immersive. Unlike other games of the era, Half-Life didn't utilize cutscenes. All of the exposition and storytelling was done in engine, giving the player full control of Gordon Freeman for virtually the entire game. This connection to the game and character had a significant effect on the growing modding community. With Half-Life's majority in-engine playtime, anything modders produced had more of an air of validity than many other games. Half-Life was also already built off of another game. Valve had licensed id Software's Quake engine to use as a foundation, so it made sense for them to encourage Half-Life's players to take the game to the next level. The game was released alongside the Valve Hammer editor, the tool used to construct levels and textures in the game. Like Doom, players didn't need to be expert hackers to mod Half-Life. They just needed an interest in the game and a dedication to making something new.
And yeah, they did. Not only did people mod the hell out of Half-Life, they started making new games. I mean, it made sense, the precedent was already there. People were making new games out of old games since Nolan Bushnell turned Spacewar into computer space. So now that people actually had easily accessible tools to do so, why wouldn't they make new stuff? One avenue in particular that really took off was the production of multiplayer mods. The game didn't really have great multiplayer. It kind of felt like an afterthought compared to how fleshed out the single player campaign was, but modders had the tools, and so they got to work. There were a few mods that came out of this era that are still relevant today, particularly Counter-Strike and Team Fortress.
Now, technically speaking, Team Fortress started as a mod for Quake, but the team behind that original mod was brought on by Valve to develop Team Fortress Classic to promote the Half-Life software development kits. It also feels, impossible to ignore the connection between the two games, considering that both of the game's sequels are pretty much inseparable. I mean, TF2 literally runs off a modified EXE of Half-Life 2. The same thing happened with Counter-Strike. While the game started as a mod for Half-Life, Valve ended up hiring those original modders, bringing them on to create the game's sequel and establish one of their flagship franchises. These days, you could throw a rock in a game store and you'd probably hit a game inspired by Half-Life's legacy. Overwatch and its ilk of hero-based shooters are heavily inspired by the imprints of Team Fortress, while Counter-Strike has become one of the biggest multiplayer FPS franchises around today. We could take it a step further, though. Dear Esther, the game largely credited for starting the walking sim genre, started as a mod for Half-Life 2. Beyond Half-Life, many other games started as mods. PUBG was originally an Arma 3 mod. Dota 2 was a Warcraft 3 mod. I could keep going, but I think the point's been made. Without modding, the modern landscape of gaming looks pretty different.
These kind of mods have a name. They're called total conversion mods, and they do exactly that. Modding relies on taking a game apart, and these certain kinds of mods deconstruct a game at different levels. For example, graphics mods only deconstruct the visual elements. Overhaul mods affect the systems. But total conversion mods take it all apart. They leave the clay, the water, the building blocks. This way you can make something new with the pre-existing code. You can take a game and make it into something else.
There's already one Skyrim mod I've brought up that does this, the Forgotten City. The mod itself is implemented into Skyrim as a standalone quest, but it takes over 5 hours to experience everything it has to offer. But the creator of the mod, Nick Pierce, took it a step further and transformed the Forgotten City into a standalone game. On its release in 2021, it received multiple award nominations, including Best Indie at the Game Awards. And while the Forgotten City might be one of the most prolific examples of a new game coming from a Skyrim mod, it's not even the biggest conversion. Currently, that claim to fame belongs to Enderal Forgotten Stories, a 2016 Skyrim total conversion mod that contains a whopping 3,100 hours of content, complete with its own world, lore, and story. It's also a sequel. The team behind Enderal also made Nehrim at Fate's Edge, a similarly large total conversion mod for Skyrim's predecessor, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. I also need to highlight the fact that Enderal is only currently the largest total conversion mod. Another mod titled Skyblivion is scheduled for release this year, and it's what it sounds like, a complete fan-made remake of Oblivion using Skyrim's creation engine. The team itself rivals the size of many other AAA development teams, with somewhere between 70 and 100 active developers. While Bethesda's surprise drop of Oblivion Remastered definitely caused some pause when it was announced, Skyblivion is still coming, full steam ahead.
These are mods for a 15-year-old game. Hundreds of hours of content, award-winning writing, and dedication so intense that it's been highlighted by Bethesda. These are projects that have every right to be called their own full game. Because each of these is made for the love of the game, both literally with obvious affection for Skyrim and figuratively because it's an outlet of creative expression and a demonstration of pure skill. And yet, somehow, modding still is not taken seriously by many in the gaming community. And it's not just the community. Modding has been attacked by the industry as long as it's been around. While some industry giants, including Bethesda, Valve, and id Software, are making their respect to modding clear, others would rather see the practice outlawed. In 1998, FormGen, the developer of Duke Nukem, sued modders over the creation and sale of fan-made Duke Nukem 3D levels. In this case, the defenders lost. That same year, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, was put into law, and effectively declared modding as a copyright infringing act. Should the copyright holder decide they don't like your mod, it's gone. I've already mentioned Nintendo's aggressive anti-modding EULAs distributed with their consoles and games. They're known for sending out cease and desist letters to any modders they can catch. For example, back in 2020, Nintendo went after a company that would host Smash Bros. Tournaments for their unlicensed mod that allowed Melee to be played online during the height of the COVID-19 lockdown. Of course, mods of Nintendo games often do slip through the cracks, but Nintendo can legally shut them down anytime that they like.
While these days modding feels pretty safe, that safety is somewhat illusionary, and primarily based on developers demonstrating public approval for modding. But a lot more companies want to ban modding than you might realize. Nintendo is just one of them. Capcom considers fan-made mods to be cheats. Square Enix consistently bans users of cosmetic mods in Final Fantasy XIV. And Ubisoft bans them in just about every one of their games. Modding isn't safe, it never has been. Just because the practice has some powerful allies doesn't mean the tide can't turn.
I actually remember the first mod I ever downloaded. It was a hardcore mod for Fallout 3. I was pretty fond of Fallout 4's survival mode and wanted a similar challenge in one of the earlier games in the series. I didn't get very far. In fact, I didn't even apply the mod properly. It took me a couple hours to realize that I was still playing the vanilla version of the game. Somewhere my installation had gone wrong, and instead of actually doing anything, the mod files were just kind of there, gathering figurative dust. The funny thing is that this still taught me a lesson almost immediately. And that was I had no clue what the hell I was doing. It made me feel kind of dumb not being able to do this thing that pretty much all of my friends were able to do without any kind of difficulty. Since then, I didn't really have a reason to try out mods. I think I downloaded a few mods for a previous Stardew Valley playthrough, but I still prefer to play the game on Switch, so modding is generally pretty inaccessible.
Skyrim is something else. I feel like a lot of the time when people talk about the game, it's always with the implication that you're downloading mods for it. So to actually get to experience what people are talking about when it comes to modifying the game, I was stunned. I think in my head, modding has always been the silly stuff, like giving the Dovahkiin a Keyblade or rocket boots, or something. I was aware of the large-scale projects modders pulled off, but it wasn't the face of modding for me. And for many, I don't think that it is either. It's hard to say how many gamers have dabbled in modding. You'll see estimates ranging from 8% to 40%, so it's likely closer to a quarter or a third. And the rest have no experience with it. But modding is integral to gaming. We've been doing it longer than commercial gaming has been around, and many, many titles and franchises owe their success to modders. Whether that's tweaking a game so much that it gets its own arcade cabinet, or inventing new game genres with the game's building blocks, modding isn't just a side hobby. It's how gaming builds a future.
I guess I have more hope than cynicism when it comes to the future of modding. As tools become more accessible and more large companies open the door to fan-made mods, more people get to dabble in game creation, or simply make something fun for their favorite game. But it's still important to remember that modding's future is unstable. All companies have to do is add some fine prints, and there's nothing that modders can do to stop it. While the law has sided with modding many times, on many other occasions, it hasn't. But gamers are persistent. Modding, by definition, is change. And like how many modders have worked to change the industry, I have to imagine that they'll continue to do so. For every challenge to modding's legitimacy, there are new creators finding their start in modding. But for those of us that don't make mods, it helps to be aware. Aware of the impact they've had on the history of gaming. Aware of the constant legal struggle they undergo. And aware of just how effortlessly they can uncap a game's potential.
Oh boy, this video was a lot of work, so thank you for watching all the way to the end. Here's a fun fact. I started working on this video in March, I think, and I'm still playing Skyrim. Anyways, I'd love it if you stuck around, sub to the channel, threw a like and a comment to the video, maybe even checked out the Patreon, get your name in the credits, see stuff early, learn behind the scenes info, and maybe even get the occasional thing like a blooper reel or a random non-essay thing that I do. Okay, that's it. Love ya. Bye.